Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My pleasure to welcome everyone to this evening's Working People of Faith event, What Are Religions Doing About Racial Inequality? And so, Working People of Faith is a multi-faith organization supported by Woking Borough Council, and it's been working since 2006 to celebrate the important contribution that religious faith makes to the lives of the local community. We seek to secure a more prominent role for faith organizations in their communities, promote good relations between people of different faiths, advance the education and understanding of different beliefs, including an awareness of their distinctive features and common ground, promote knowledge and mutual understanding and respect to the beliefs and practices of different faiths. And we do this through public meetings, such as tonight's event, developing programs such as educational visits, sporting events, and community service. We had originally planned to have this event in a large venue, but COVID-19 had different plans. So this is our first larger scale webinar event where we can keep all our participants safe. So I didn't introduce myself. I'm Simon Trick, the current chair of Working People of Faith. In tonight's program, we have 6 speakers in all. We have Donovan Blair, who will be giving an introductory speech on his experiences in the UK. And he'll be speaking for 10 minutes altogether. Then we will be having, we should be having Shashank, but I believe he's not available. Unfortunately, there's been some problem his side, possible some technical difficulties, but he's not turned up as yet. So if we're lucky, he will be able to join us. We have Rabbi Danny Rich from the Jewish faith. We have Reverend Paul Davis from the Christian faith. We have Ahmed-Ikhlas from the Muslim faith and Mandisa Taylor from the Baha'i faith. During the talks, feel free, please, to use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen to type in questions that we can then later put to our speakers in the last section of the program. At the end of the talks, we'll have a short break, in which time my Working People of Faith colleagues, Kautha Akhtar and Kerry Barry, who have just gone, I think, to, they've now gone to off screen, as it were. They'll be selecting some of the questions for me to put to the speakers, because unfortunately there will not be enough time to answer every question. My colleague, Reverend Phil Simpson, is hosting today's event and keeping us, we hope, gremlin free, Phil. Having said that, we've already had some gremlins and our lovely attendees have already seen them, but that's the way life is, I'm afraid, in this COVID-filled Zoom world. So what I'm going to be doing next is I'm going to be asking our speakers to begin their talks. So it's my great pleasure to ask Donovan Blair to speak to us tonight. And I really look forward to hearing what you've got to say. So I'm going to put myself onto mute, and Donovan, over to you.
Thank you, Simon, and good evening, fellow panelists and ladies and gentlemen in the audience. My name is Donovan Blair. I was born in this country over 60 plus years ago to parents who were Jamaican. I currently live in Woking, and I have 2 grown-up boys who are pretty much born and raised in Woking, and these days I'm semi-retired. The subject matter for today's discussion is what are religions doing about race equality? As you'll all appreciate, it's a complex subject, and the speakers that follow me will provide you with some informed views on the specific progress that's being made. I was asked to provide a more personal perspective as to what race inequality looks and feels like from a viewpoint that I think I'm qualified to give, that is of the Caribbean Windrush generation and their descendants. And given 99% of this particular group of immigrants to Britain are Black people, my talk will inevitably touch on race and racism from time to time. I'll wrap through my talk and take any questions or observations at the end, as Simon has indicated. A little background on my parents, both of whom have sadly passed now. My dad was a carpenter in Jamaica, and my mum a school teacher. Both grew up in Jamaica and received a proper British colonial education. And by that, I mean that they knew chapter and verse all about the kings and queens of England, the works of Shakespeare, Dickens, Wordsworth, the nature of exports from other British colonies, as well as the annual output of steel, stainless steel, from Sheffield. Amazingly, though, they didn't know very little, or they knew very little, about the politics, the history, or the economic facts about their own island of Jamaica. You see, back in the day, these subjects just didn't form any part of the Jamaican school curriculum. It's against this background, and in 1948, that the first of 500 or so immigrants from Jamaica arrived at Tilbury Docks in East London aboard the Empire Windrush on a misty morning in June. My parents weren't aboard that ship. They came about a year or so later on another boat. However, what brought these proud sons and daughters of empire to Britain was the clarion call they received from the British government. The British Prime Minister, Clement Attlee, had made an emotional appeal to those in the Caribbean, including my parents, that it was their duty to come to Britain and help rebuild it after the devastation wrought by the Second World War. And so it was, with a heady mix of pride, patriotism, enthusiasm, excitedness, and apprehension, that so many young men and women left the Caribbean islands to travel to the UK. They did so in order to answer that call from what they thought of as the mother country. What was ironic when they arrived in Britain was that they discovered they knew far more about Britain and its history than many of the British people. Their reception on arriving here was not quite what they expected. I don't think the government of the day had thought to prepare native English people for the arrival of large numbers of brown-skinned people. This unwelcome was all the more extraordinary given the total number of Windrush generation who had actually fought alongside their British white counterparts during World War II. Work was not too much of an issue, plenty of vacancies, public transport, the NHS, the construction industries. However, the biggest issue was that of housing and homelessness. It was nigh on impossible to rent. No blacks, no Irish, no dogs. These were typical of the signs in the windows of houses with room to let. There was significant hostility also, and violence in some cases, from sections of the indigenous population towards black people in the 50s. But you should note that there were race riots and black deaths. There's a guy called Kelso Cochrane that occurred, particularly in the Ladbroke Grove area. Keep Britain White, Blacks Go Home graffiti was daubed on walls, and violent gangs sort of marauded around the Notting Hill area under the banner of the British Union movement and the White Defence League. Homes in the area owned by or rented to black people were sometimes petrol bombed. My dad was obliged to live in the Clapham North Tube air raid shelter for 3 months until he was able to secure lodgings with a distant relative in Luton. This was because it was nigh on impossible to find a place to rent. Buying a property in those days was a near impossible task, even if one had the money. Banks in those days wouldn't willingly lend money or give mortgages to black people. His best friends were Irish, who exhibited a shared national psyche, similar tales of prejudice experienced, similar love of drinking, dancing, and singing. We attended many Irish ceilidhs as kids, which were great fun as we were allowed to run around and were given small bottles of Babysham to drink surreptitiously. Don't let your parents see, we were admonished. Dad eventually found work with George Wimpey Construction Company, worked on that big Centrepoint building at the top of Charing Cross Road. My mum taught English literature at Hatchlands Park Girls' School in Effingham, but had a tough time there as a result of the racism she experienced. I can't imagine there would have been too many brown faces around that area in 1951 to support her. So after a year, she became so unhappy that she resigned her post and moved to Southeast London and retrained as a nurse at Dulwich Hospital. Interestingly, my parents met at the Hammersmith Palais, where Jamaican promoters would put on big dances primarily for the Caribbean community. These dances were necessary because nearly all of the traditional British dance venues operated a colour bar, which prevented black people from entering such establishments. "You can't come in, mate, you're not a member," was one of the excuses used to refuse entrance. And that was not untypical of the sort of things that my parents had to put up with. As children, my parents instilled in us the virtues of hard work, honesty, and integrity, as well as the importance of education. I certainly wouldn't be the man I am today if it wasn't for these valuable life lessons. You have to be twice as good as your white counterparts if you want to be successful, was the constant refrain in my ear as I grew up. It's disappointing that here in the 21st century, I feel it necessary to have this same conversation with my boys. My mum finished her distinguished nursing career as a Queen's nursing sister, an award given to nursing practitioners who consistently demonstrated commitment to patient care and nursing practice in the community. She was absolutely delighted to go to Buckingham Palace and be presented with her award by Princess Anne. On reflection, I sometimes think that because of her upbringing and despite her experiences in the UK, that she felt more British than she felt Jamaican. And yet, despite all of their hard work in this country, raising decent children, they never felt truly accepted here. There was always this unsubtle and unpleasant undertone. They're after our jobs. There are too many of them moving into the area. Their men are after our women. We don't want our kids playing with their kids. They're not clean. Their food smells. My parents accepted all of this with the quiet stoicism and indignity that's a common characteristic of many of the Windrush generation. Don't make a fuss. Doesn't matter. Sticks and stones. It'll all work out eventually. I think that's right sometimes, but not all the time. The ongoing crisis within the Home Office with regards to whether the Windrush generation have residency entitlement to stay in this country throws a revealing spotlight on this government's attitude to immigrants, specifically the Windrush generation. Politics today, particularly race politics, can at times be a pretty shameful affair. Even today, there are still some mostly elderly West Indians being rounded up and imprisoned while their immigration status is verified. And only the day before yesterday, Greg Clark was obliged to resign his position as the FA chairman as a result of some ill-judged remarks and racial tropes that he chose to use in his address to a parliamentary select committee. I think in finishing, what I'd probably like to say is that, we need to have a conversation, some absolute conversations about race, about history. Need both black and white to understand real history rather than this Hollywood version that seems to be out there that the British Empire was the greatest thing since sliced bread. It wasn't. It's not anybody's fault today, but we need to kind of have that conversation to speak the truth of the matter if we are to be able to move forward constructively and have a dialogue that encompasses some elements of equality for all in this country. And that's all I have to say this afternoon or this evening. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Donovan. That's wonderful. I think you've really set the scene there for the talks that are to come this evening. And so thank you indeed. And hopefully good food for thought for our attendees who will be, I'm hoping, coming up with some questions. To say the Q&A button should be at the bottom of your screens. Attendees, if you have a look. If worst comes to worst, you can put something in the chat, but the Q&A is the preferable place, please. So we're now going to move on to our evening speakers. As I said to speakers earlier on, if you could we'll give you an extra 30 seconds so you can give a very short introduction to yourself if it's not already part of your talk. And our first speaker this evening is going to be Rabbi Danny Rich of the Jewish Faith. So, Danny, I'm glad to be able to see your face finally. It's great. And looking forward to hearing what you've got to say this evening. So over to you. You have to unmute yourself, Danny.
Can I start now? Yeah. So I'm a British-born liberal Jew and a hospital and prison chaplain in my introduction. And I just want to say that what Donovan said, I could have put the Jews in there when I think particularly about their links with the Irish people at Cable Street resisting fascism. But nevertheless, that's not what I've been asked to talk about. I'm going to talk about Judaism and Jews. What are Judaism and Jews doing about racial equality? And friends, you'll notice the first thing is that I made a distinction in Judaism and Jews. Judaism is a religious philosophy or way of life, ancient in origin, but capable of adapting to modernity, at least from my perspective as a liberal Jew. There are, in my view, a number of principles elucidated in Jewish texts which ought make the eradication of racial inequality a priority for any person who is seeking to live in accord with Jewish teaching. At least as far as what is known as the Western world is concerned, Judaism is the oldest, longest surviving expression of ethical monotheism, the idea that the universe owes its existence to a single creator who is a God of righteousness, justice, love, compassion, and forgiveness. These moral attributes are not only describe God's nature and governance of the world, but in accord with the Genesis description of the creation of humankind as being created in the image of God, Genesis 1, verse 27, they also lay down what is expected of a human conduct, both individually and in society. A rabbinic interpretation of the creation story reinforces the point vividly. Why, according to Jewish scripture, did God create only one man and one woman, one human duo? Surely God could have fashioned a number of gardens of Eden and different pairs of progenitors in different places. It was to ensure, according to the rabbis, that no person in the future will be able to say to another, my ancestry is better than yours. The Hebrew Bible adds two further principles. In Exodus 22:20 and elsewhere, the Hebrew Bible observes no less than 36 times that you shall not mistreat a stranger, nor should you oppress a stranger, for you were strangers in Egypt. In other words, experience of marginalization demands that you do not impose a similar situation on others. This is combined, of course, with the well-known Levitical principle from chapter 19, verse 18, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. In terms of society, the rabbis of the Talmud evolved from Jeremiah's famous prayer for welfare of the city into which he had been exiled, the idea in Aramaic, dina malchuta dina, the law of the land is nevertheless, the good citizen is responsible for seeking justice for all, not justice only for themselves. Returning to the book of Leviticus, many Jews understand from it an obligation to rebuke a neighbor or speak out in a society in the name of what is right and just. Judaism and Jewish teaching is, of course, only of limited value unless it's practiced by somebody, presumably by Jews. There are few countries in the world and few racial types which do not have their share of Jews. There are black Jews of Ethiopia, for example. There are Jews who describe their color skin as brown, including the sari-wearing ones of India. There are Jews with racial characteristics akin to the Chinese and Koreans, for example. And there are Jews who are a mixture of two or more of these. So whilst Judaism deplores racial inequality, and there are Jews of all racial types, it does not mean that racism does not occur within Jewish communities, and neither can it be said that black Jews automatically feel welcome in every Jewish community. Recently, the Board of Deputy British Jews established a commission on racial inclusivity in the Jewish community, chaired by Stephen Bush, the political editor of the New Statesman. Closer to home, liberal Judaism, which I headed for 15 years, until March of this year, has established an initiative as follows. I'm quoting directly from their material now. We recognize that the Jewish faith is made up of multiracial people. The work of our initiative includes educating our own Jewish and wider communities that Jewish people are multiracial. We also recognize that within our faith community, Jews of color do not always feel welcome and have faced racism. Our work includes reviewing the educational offerings for youth and adults and recommending resources to diversify the curriculum. Encourage and support our communities to elevate Jews of colour, that's the term that they use, it might not be the one that I would choose or anybody else, term they use, into positions of leadership, particularly being on boards of trustees and leading religious services. We are reviewing our communications websites, digital and print material in order to have inclusive, welcoming language. A number of our synagogues have started anti-racism groups to address locally the issues above. And last week, one synagogue had a service celebrating the contribution of Black Jews to the Jewish community, and are working with a group called Sister, which is about encouraging Black women to take their place in the when they should. So I'm going to conclude, I think early, because I think I had 7 minutes, but I'm doing it in 5.5, which can't be bad, can it really? I'm going to conclude with these words. When I think about this issue, and there's so much one could say, but I realize this is only an introduction, I'm reminded of the words of the ancient Hebrew prophet Amos in chapter 9:7, who said to the Israelites of the day, "Are you not like the Ethiopians to me, O people of Israel?" Now, what did God mean by that? Well, of course, none of us know what God means when God speaks, and we don't know what Amos meant when he wrote it. But to me, it means an idea that racial inequality is a scourge on our society, not only because, as Donovan has already attested to, it has impact on individuals, hardworking, decent, lovely individuals, but because it's a blasphemy. It's a form of blasphemy, because God says to what was then a olive skin, they probably weren't white, but an olive skin tribe of Israelites, "Are you not like the Ethiopians?" And we do know that the Ethiopians, and there's a Hebrew term, were of a darker skin. So what God is saying is, if racial equality is good enough for me, how much the more so for you?
Thank you, Danny. That's lovely. And 6 minutes and 43 seconds, I counted that too. So you did very well. Okay, thank you very much indeed. I'm looking forward to hearing our next speaker, who's going to be Reverend Paul Davies, and I'm going to be really interested in hearing all the different perspectives that all the faiths are giving. So I'm hoping our attendees are taking note of this, and maybe then that will help them with their own questions that they'll be asking at the end. I've seen 1 or 2 questions coming up already, so it looks like it's going to be a fascinating time. So without further ado, and I'm going to ask the Reverend Paul Davies to speak to us from the Christian perspective. And please don't forget to unmute yourself, Paul. And Donovan, could you mute yourself, please, while I think about asking? I forgot to ask you earlier. Okay. That's okay. Thank you very much. Okay, over to you, Paul. Don't forget 30 seconds for introductions first, and then I'll start the countdown.
Bless you. Thank you very much. Yep, I'm Paul, or more formally, not the Reverend, the Venerable, which means that I'm an Archdeacon, the Archdeacon of Surrey. Archdeacons are the most senior clergy in the diocese after the bishop. If you listen to me carefully, you'll discover that I'm not English. I've been here 3 years. I'm Welsh. Welsh is my first language, and until I moved here, I'd spent all my time in Wales. I am married to a Surrey girl, though. I'm one of the brave South Walians who dared work in the north. And as a welcome gift, they gave me a single railway ticket back to South Wales. So I'm interested in more local aspects of racial discrimination as well. Often when Church of England people speak, they have 3 points, and I'll try and keep them brief. The themes, firstly, the Christian faith strongly renounces any form of racial discrimination. The themes of the Hebrew Bible are built upon in the Christian scriptures. In the Gospels, Jesus makes it clear that he has come not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. And foundational to his whole purpose is to encourage people to love God and neighbour. Much of his ministry is about expanding and illustrating this. There's a particularly powerful story which he tells in response to a question asked of him, "And who is my neighbour?" The story he tells, the famous one of the Good Samaritan, is one which sees people break down the walls of racial prejudice and discrimination as the Samaritan comes to the rescue of the Jew. The theme continues in the rest of the New Testament. St. Paul, who writes many of the letters, says that there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And finally, Revelation, the final book of the New Testament, an eschatological vision of the future, portrays a heavenly picture, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne. And so whilst the Christian scriptures might refer to situations of racial discrimination, the Christian faith strongly renounces any form of it whatsoever. Secondly, the living out of equality in the history of our Christian church over the last 2,000 years has been less impressive. We have some very serious repentance to do. Repentance, firstly, for the past. Historically, the role that Christianity has played in racial discrimination and white supremacy has been shocking, and it's painful to reflect upon. And what is even more painful is that scripture or theology has often been twisted and used as a justification for racial discrimination. In 1215, Canon 68 of the Fourth Lateran Council legalized racial law in the Latin West by ordering Jews and Muslims to mark themselves off by a difference of dress. Alongside this, Muslims were turned into non-humans, with Bernard of Clairvaux, who co-wrote the rule for the Order of the Templars, announcing that the killing of Muslims wasn't actually homicide but malicide, the extermination of evil, not the killing of a person. We know that when Europeans came to spread new empires, they usually came with book and sword, more use of the Bible as a blunt instrument. And we know enough about the influence of the church in slavery, which was usually rooted in discriminatory principles. Although I do delight that it was through the father of Samuel Wilberforce, a former Archdeacon of Surrey, that significant improvements were made in this area, although we know there's still so much to do. And we have so much repentance to do in the present too. Whilst we are beginning to move, I know that I belong to a church which often does, although often doesn't see it, is institutionally racist. I've been alongside several of my wonderful BAME clergy who've shared stories that have made me cry. So thirdly, what are we trying to do to address this situation? The answer is not enough, but we have made a start in the Church of England and the Diocese of Guildford. Firstly, we celebrate a small but significant increase in the number of BAME, lay and ordained ministers in the diocese, from 0 in 2016 to 7 today. Second, the senior leadership team had a training on unconscious bias as a springboard to a new culture. Thirdly, we've made some key BAME appointments. We've elected a cleric as one of our representatives on the General Synod of the Church of England, and lots of other roles too. And perhaps most significantly, and largely in response to the George Floyd killing, the Guildford Diocese are in the process of forming a racial justice focus group. The purpose of this group will be to collect better data on BAME presence within our diocese and its structures, with the aim of ensuring fairer representation at all levels, the rolling out of unconscious bias training at all levels, the investment in clergy and laity of BAME heritage through targeted support and mentoring to enable them to achieve their potential as leaders in the Church of England, celebrating racial diversity in our diocese, not least through its various communication channels, and reconsidering and responding appropriately to the monuments and artifacts in our churches and our churchyards that may relate to aspects of the slave trade. With the heritage that we have, that's an enormous task, but we are committed to it. And with that point, I think I'll stop before being cut off.
Actually, you've actually got about 1.5 minutes left if you wish to use that. So it's 7 minutes, not 5. So
Okay.
I stopped the clock, so I shall restart it. Your time begins now.
It's fine. I can give that back to the next person.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed, Paul, and giving us that outlook on the Christian faith perspective and the development and changes within the church and how that's impacted on racial inequality. Can I just say that I'm from Swansea myself? So there you go.
I am.
Oh, lovely. Sorry, everybody. I want a private tour. Which part of Swansea are you from?
No, I'm a Pembrokeshire boy.
Oh, Pembrokeshire. Oh, that's lovely.
Very far west.
Yeah, it's a lovely place. Anyway, I won't carry on about the Welsh with the Welsh League here now. I'm now going to pass on. Thank you, Paul. If you'd like to mute yourself, please. I'm now going to pass on to our next speaker, who is Ahmed-Ikhlas Gray from the Muslim faith. And as I've been, just a reminder, Ahmed, if you have the first 30 seconds, I won't start the clock for you until you've had a chance to tell us a little bit about your own background. And then after that 30 seconds, you'll be able to carry on with the rest of your talk. Okay, so over to you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله حق قدره ومقداره العظيم. Yeah, so my name is Ahmed-Ikhlas. I am a British-born individual of Jamaican heritage. My grandparents came to England with the Windrush service as well. And I'm a convert to Islam. I was raised in a Christian family, and I used to attend the church when I was younger, every Sunday. And it was later on in life I started to have questions about my faith, and it wasn't until I looked into my cultural heritage background, which was Africa, that enabled me to embrace Islam. So I'm commonly known as international dub poet, and what I do, I perform mostly Islamic songs, which has a fusion of Caribbean style. So I go around the country, and I've traveled around the world, and what my aim is to do is to display this cultural diversity that we have in Islam, where many people seem to think that Islam is just one particular culture, or a few particular cultures which are quite common. So Arab culture or Asian culture, Indo-Pak or Malay. It's quite often when people hear that I'm a Caribbean Muslim, they're quite shocked. So what's happening there? Not realizing that the fact that Islam is actually a universal religion and not a cultural religion. So so that's the job that I try to do. So in terms of the Islamic faith, for me it's a blueprint. It's a blueprint for universal brotherhood, amongst different races, amongst different people, different backgrounds. We have many narrations in the faith, particularly in the Quran. There's a verse that says that Almighty God has made nations and tribes of different nations to know each other and not to despise each other. And there's also verses talking about various different tongues, and there's this emphasis that have been created specifically different in order to know each other and to treat each other well and to recognize each other by our nations. We do have a famous narration from the Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, which was in his last sermon, which many Muslims like to quote whenever there's a racial discussion. So a segment of the last sermon is when the Prophet Muhammad specifically said that there is no superiority over Arabs or non-Arabs, or blacks over whites, and what makes one superior, if you like, is good deeds, piety, one that is close to God. That's where the merits come from. It doesn't come from your race or your background. So unfortunately, in Islam, the Muslims, we have big problems in this regard, you know. And if you look, for example, at any committee, whether that be the masjid or religious committee, there's a lack of representation from the Black Muslims, and there is this this notion that there's no scholarship within the Black countries that are Muslim, you know, and there's a lack of representation of Black women as well. And unfortunately, what we see is in terms of cultures who subscribe to the Islamic faith have this this attitude towards Black people, which is quite prevalent, to be honest. For example, if you were to attend a mosque in an area that wasn't obviously populated by Black people, then you would be looked upon in a different way. Like, why are you coming to this masjid when, you know, that individual was just going to the mosque just to pray with his brothers, people who he considers brothers, you know. I'll give you an example. We had a couple of years ago, we had Muslims coming out, especially for Black History Month. There was a lot of Black Muslims who were speaking about their experiences as Black Muslims, and also speaking about the merits of the contribution that Black Muslims have given to Islam. So that being said, there was a lot of testimonies about how individuals have felt they've been treated by the other Muslim communities. And it was people from all different parts of the world, Britain, America, Canada, and the stories are all very similar. Being shunned in the community, being asked if they are really Muslim, you know. And I feel a lot of times when this conversation comes up, it's actually shunned, unfortunately. And it's actually swept under the carpet. People's normal answers would be, well, there's no racism in Islam, so you know that's nothing to do with Islam. But the thing is, this is happening to a lot of people, you know, and unfortunately people have started to question their own faith, you know, because of how they are made to feel, you know. That being said, there has been some effort from organizations to really get behind this. I would note the British Muslim Council. They have been putting a lot of events on, for example, for Black History Month, and speaking about the contributions of Black Muslims and what they've done for the religion, and how, you know, the fact that Islam has been in Africa from the beginning. The first set of migrants that fled Arabia to receive sanctuary was actually in Ethiopia, you know, and that's where Islam actually was. That was the first country where Islam was allowed to be practiced, you know. So you know, organizations like British Muslim Council, and there's others, have made that bold step to, you know, let's talk about this. There is a problem in this community, and we need to not bury it, you know, in the dirt. We need to have this conversation, you know. So yeah, so that's my time. Sorry, it was a bit scattered. I didn't have time to prepare.
You still got half a minute if you like.
No, I'll leave it there. Thanks very much.
That's okay. Thank you very much indeed, Ahmed. It's again, what I particularly like is actually hearing all these very different perspectives on racial inequality, and to hear that from you as a Black Muslim is particularly insightful. So thank you very much indeed. I'm going to be passing on now to Mandisa Nakana Taylor, I was going to say an old friend of mine, but you're not old, so I'll just say a very, very, very good friend of mine.
I would have accepted either one, Simon, or both.
Yeah, you can get me later. Okay. So I'm passing on to Mandisa. Mandisa, obviously, we're talking about the Baha'i faith and its how Baha'is are dealing with racial inequality. But Mandisa, please, if you spend the first 30 seconds, so just saying something about yourself, your background, please, and then I'll start the clock 7 minutes from then. Okay, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Simon. And good evening, everybody. As Simon said, my name is Mandisa. I'm a mom. I'm a cover teacher at a primary school, and I grew up in South Africa, and I've been living in the UK for a very, very long time. And I consider this as my second home. And yeah, this will form part of my talk, actually, is that backdrop of my career fused with my upbringing in South Africa. So I'll get straight to it. A while ago, I had the joy and the privilege of being tasked with a colleague of mine to come up with a workshop for the children at our school that was designed to promote oneness and to explore the theme of oneness. Because what we didn't want was just a tick box exercise that said, oh, well, it happens to be Black History Month. What are we doing about this particular thing? We wanted it to be all encompassing, and we wanted it to touch the hearts of the children in a way that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. And being raised as a Baha'i, I drew my inspiration from the Baha'i principles. And when I was little growing up, I used to attend Baha'i children's classes. And I grew up with the notion that there is only one race of people. There is the human race. And we come in different tones and shades, like the flowers of one garden. There's even a song about it that just about every child who's been to a Baha'i children's class knows. And this is what the principle that I was raised with. And I wanted to bring that as the central theme of the workshops. Nature is a very, very big part of the way Baha'u'llah taught. So Baha'u'llah is the founder of the Baha'i faith. And Baha'u'llah always said that there are clues to be had and seen in nature, in the perfect balance, the fact that nature doesn't compete but cooperates. And this is how the world of humanity is described in the Baha'i faith. It is likened to a human body. So every single cell, every single limb is working together in harmony and cooperation to make things work. And it was a very, very important starting point for the children to make it known to them that the notion of oneness is not just an airy-fairy kind of, utopian dream. It is a scientific fact as well as a religious foundational principle. And when we looked at the religions all across, I'm so happy to be hearing, the panelists from different religions, because you are just confirming everything that I saw when I was doing my research, is that there are no contradictions. All the religions know this to be true. And science tells us that 99.9% of our DNA is the same. So we took on this two-pronged approach of saying, right, we need to tell the children about the science and the religion, and that's how we know it's the truth. Because another principle of the Baha'i faith is independent investigation of truth. And if a fact is verified by science, check. Verified by religion, check. You can bet it's a pretty good fact and you can roll with that. So that was a really good starting point for us. Baha'u'llah says, O children of men, know ye not why we created you all from the same dust, that no one should exalt himself over the other. We also, because I teach at a Church of England school, we quoted quotations from the Bible as well that really echo the same sentiment. So what's the solution? Apart from beautiful quotations and writings that inspire and touch hearts, what is actually the blueprint that has been laid down by the Baha'i faith to eliminate racial prejudice? And the first thing that I came across was forging strong relationships and bonds of friendship with people from all walks of life, that being an antidote to the corrosive disease of or prejudice, actually. If we get to know people and really understand and ask questions that perhaps would have been hush hush, because at the end of this workshop that we ran with the children, they were able to more boldly describe people just the way they are. Children are not colorblind. They can very clearly see that there are differences in people, but they don't attribute those differences to anything negative unless we as adults do that. So by the end of the workshop, they were saying, you know, words like, that's a Black person, that's a white person, without it being an uncomfortable conversation. And that's one of the barriers that was broken down, is I'm your friend, you're my friend, we're all friends, and yet we can say these things without the fear of hurting anyone's feelings, because we don't mean it in a derogatory way, and we can then ask questions. The other thing was to make that deliberate effort to lift people up and to raise capacity in all walks of life and everywhere we go. That's why Baha'is are always involved in classes and study circles that are specifically designed for this purpose, to raise people's spiritual capacity in order to be the noble beings that we were created to be. And one example I got was way back in 1912, when Abdu'l-Baha, the eldest son of the founder of the Baha'i faith, traveled to America. And he had the joy of meeting one of the first Black Baha'is. His name was Louis Gregory, and he was the son of slaves. And he actually, just after the emancipation of slavery, was able to further his education and become an attorney. And Abdu'l-Baha was invited by Mr. Gregory to give a talk at Howard University all about the oneness of mankind and how to establish peace in the world. So after this event, Abdu'l-Baha was the guest of honor at this reception, and it was an all-white reception, and there were all these really well-to-do people there. And Abdu'l-Baha stood up before the food was served and said, "Where is Mr. Gregory? Please bring me Mr. Gregory." And they put they made a place setting for him on the right side of Abdu'l-Baha, and he sat right next to Mr. Gregory in 1912 in a room full of people who would not have, that would not otherwise have happened. That's an example of how it's been of our exemplar. Abdu'l-Baha leads by example. So these inspiring examples really about creating those bonds of friendship and being able to have these conversations and to talk about oneness in a very real and practical way, so that we're walking with the same feet, as one of the other quotations in the Baha'i faith talks about. And really it's about not just changing our hearts as individuals, but building our communities and completely reshuffling institutions as a result of that change.
Thank you very much, Mandisa. You got me just before I was about to stop you there, so well done. Thank you. So thank you very much to all our speakers this evening for all their contributions. What's going to be happening now is that my two colleagues, Kerry Barry and Kautha Akhtar, are going to be just going through the questions and coming back to me with information on that. In the meantime, I'm just going to see if I can actually stop sharing my screen. Okay, can you all see my screen at the moment? Can you see that screen? Yep, you can't. Okay, that's fine. Right, okay, let's get rid of that. Right, I'm going to get my notes up, otherwise I'm going to forget everything. Because I said to someone this evening, I'm a bear of very little brain. So there we go. Okay, so again, thank you for the talks. That's been very helpful. I'm looking forward to hearing the questions. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Working People of Faith's upcoming events. So I say Working People of Faith works very hard to bring people of all different backgrounds together to help understanding and to break down barriers of prejudice of all forms, religious, racial, cultural, etc. And we've got on the 18th of November, there's going to be a virtual tour of the Shah Jahan Mosque, which you can see on the screen where Kautha's name is. It's going to be a virtual tour. And if you want the link to that, you'll need to go to Kautha Akhtar, and perhaps Kautha can provide us later on with the with her link, or at least with her email, so people can contact her for that. But that should be very interesting. I think it's about 11 o'clock in the morning on the 18th of November. We have a ladies' coffee morning, which is coming up on Saturday, the 28th of November. And these are 40-minute Zoom sessions, a great way to meet and to chat to ladies of other faiths. Feel free to join us, invite a friend, no set agenda, they chat about anything. And I am told reliably, never run out of things to say. And sometimes they have gone on to a second 40-minute session if they find that their conversations are really going well. And that's but basically 10:30 a.m. to 11:10 a.m. Saturday, the 28th of November is the next one. And we hope in the new year to return to a more normal agenda, maybe possibly even have some face-to-face meetings. That's what we're hoping for, but that's obviously down to COVID-19. I'm not quite sure yet how that's going to go. But just to say that in the United Nations Harmony Week, we hope to be having the Working People of Faith story, giving people a background of how it began and the trials and tribulations of building it up into the organization it is today from some of the founders of the organization. And later in the year, we're hoping to have our walking pilgrimage to places of pilgrimage within Woking. We've done 2 previously. They've been very successful, and it's a wonderful way to learn more about other places of worship within your own community. We have a football tournament between different faiths, which should be good fun in June. I don't have the date here at the moment, but that will come on our Working People of Faith, website, wpof.org.uk. So keep an eye open for that, but that will be in June. We have the last post, which is where we go to, and my brain has got a complete blank as I'm just trying to remember the name of our wonderful cemetery within the Woking area. My brain's got a blank. If you can remember, sorry?
Brookwood.
Brookwood, thank you. I went completely out of my mind then. In Brookwood, the military cemetery where we go to there, and we're taken to see different parts of that to find out about the people in those different areas and different religions within those sections. And when we also have an interfaith, service at the end of that as well, plus the last post itself from a military bugler as well. It's a very moving ceremony. It's something that I would encourage people to come along to, and hopefully that will go ahead this year. And we also usually have International Day of Peace in September, where we have children from different schools who competed with posters and poems connected to our World Peace theme, and it's a chance for us to give out prizes for their contributions and see their contributions, and we have contributions also from people of different faiths and backgrounds as well. So hopefully those will start to go ahead again as per normal in 2021, God willing. Okay, so I'm just going to have a look at my chat now, which I didn't look at. So okay. Right, I've got a few questions here. Now we've got about half an hour. When it's your turn to speak, please unmute yourself. I'm going to go to the questions. Here we go. Okay, so I've got a question here for Donovan, and it says, thank you for describing your parents' experience of coming to the UK. It was very moving. Can you give any pointers for what we can do to put pressure on the government to change their attitude towards the Windrush generation? Donovan.
An interesting question. I think it's probably in 2 pieces, the solution. I think the long-term solution is, as I indicated, we need to have a proper retelling of history. We need to have a proper retelling of history so that people understand actually what was done and what wasn't done. At the moment, there's some sort of, I don't mean to be offensive to anybody, but it's almost like a glamorized Hollywood version of what the British Empire was, and people that lived under the British Empire should be jolly grateful that they did. And it's not quite as straightforward or as simple as that. And until we can get to that point where we're actually talking the truth, and everybody understands that, both black and white, I'm not sure how much further you can move along this particular road, because you're starting from a false premise. That's the long-term solution: education, a retelling of history. And I think that would be useful, because I've said many times, there are no children that are ever born racist. They're like sponges. They're waiting for information. If you give them the wrong information, they'll go away and think that that's it. So I think that's the long-term solution: education, a sort of fessing up as to what history actually was. In the short term, I think we've just got to be activists around these things. I think most people now understand that the Windrush generation have been very poorly treated, particularly by the current government with their hostile environment. And I think that there are a couple of things that have happened over the last few months that kind of give me a certain amount of confidence that activism of one sort or another can be very powerful. And I'm thinking particularly of people like Marcus Rashford, who has done an enormous amount of good for people and kids who are going hungry. I don't think anybody, amongst us is against the idea that children should be fed. And he's made the government not look silly, but certainly force them into a U-turn on 2 occasions. And that's the power of activism. He has a platform, granted, United player, lots of people following him on the various social media platforms. But I think I'd like to see something similar, a platform being sought for the people of the Windrush generation, for people to kind of get behind and put that kind of activist pressure on the government till eventually they've got to kind of throw that policy out of the window. Because currently it's still the case. There are still elderly West Indians being held up, imprisoned, whilst their immigration status is being verified. And these people have been here 30, 40, 50 years. How is that possible? So, as I said, 2 answers. One is about long-term education, changing people's minds at a very early age. And the second is we've got to get more active with this. We need some form of political activism to get this up the agenda as far as the government of the day is concerned, because I don't believe that they are listening perhaps as well as they should be.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to move on to a different question, because I've seen some that are specifically for other members of the panel. So I'm going to move on to the one that says, for Rabbi Rich, how do you equate the words of the Bible about treating your neighbor as yourself and Israel's treatment of Palestine?
Well, I first want to say it's very interesting, isn't it? I was the only speaker who said I was British born or English born, as opposed to being Welsh born or South African or from originally in Afro-Caribbean, and spoke about Jamaica and everything. And yet I'm the only speaker to be asked about a foreign government. No Muslim speaker was asked about Iran or Pakistan. Our South African board speaker wasn't asked about the government of South Africa and its policies. But somehow a Jew in this country is associated with the policies of the Israeli government. And I want to make that point, not because I want and I'm sure it was asked in genuine concern by the individuals. I don't want to trash the questionnaire or even the question, but it is very interesting that Jews are automatically associated with the actions of a foreign government, namely the government of the State of Israel, which I don't have a vote in, I don't live in. Some of my family live there and some of my friends live there, but I don't have a say in it, in the same way that every Muslim doesn't have a say in the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran, or a South African-born person who lives here may not have a say in the government, the current policies of the South African government. So regrettably, I want to make that point, because one of the challenges that Jews have in terms of racism or inequality is that everybody implies that somehow I'm not quite entitled to be here because I'm really part of a foreign government or a foreign agent or a foreign society. And it's a deeply problematic one. Now, that's the first point I want. The second point I want to say, it is true, however, that there is only one state that in the world that describes itself as Jewish, by the way, or Jewish by origin. A lot of states describe themselves as Christian or with Christian established churches. A number of Muslims. There's only one Jewish state, interesting, which receives lots and lots of publicity, unlike the actions of Iran against its Baha'is, or China against the Bhutanese and the Nepalese, and the current government of Modi against Muslims. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on, but the only country that's constantly asked about on a religious panel is the State of Israel. So I want to make that point before now answering the question, which is this. When the State of Israel doesn't treat Palestinians equally, I will say and have said that is in breach of Jewish principles. I also want to say, by the way, that 23% of Israel's population are Arabs, primarily Muslims, with full votes, full rights, and able to send Knesset members able to vote for their own, if they choose to. There's an Arab party, at least one Arab party, able to send their own parliamentary representatives. There are Arab judges. The deputy ambassador in this country for a while was a Druze, some people call them Muslims, not everybody called Druze Muslims, but certainly wasn't a Jew. So the State of Israel, like most governments in the world, is an imperfect one, but it has absorbed more immigrants from more countries than virtually any other country in the world. And it partly does that, and this I want to having heard what Donovan says, it partly does that because, like some countries, it has a immigration policy which assumes that immigrants are telling the truth. The biggest problem with our Home Office currently is it assumes that immigrants are lying. It makes the general assumption and treats people who come to this country to immigrate to this country, to come into this country, as though they're lying and as though they're hostile, as though they're making everything up. And it's very interesting if you look at other countries which have a policy of generally believing people who come to their country, that when people are turned down in those countries, they often accept the decision. Whereas in this country, we don't accept the decisions, partly because we don't trust the ethos under which their decisions are made. So I've made 2 points, one about Israel and one about the immigration system.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to one now that will be open to everyone to answer, but I'll take it in a particular order so people who've not spoken yet will get the first opportunities to speak. So the question here is that the faiths seem to be united. Is the problem that it is the people without a practicing faith that are not governed by our ethics who show discrimination? I'm going to start with you, Paul. Then I'm going to go on to Mandisa following you, and then I'll go on to Ahmad following Mandisa. Okay, so Paul.
I think I heard 2 questions there. Sorry, can I ask you just to repeat that?
Yes, the faiths seem to be united. It says, is the problem that it's the people without a practicing faith that are not governed by our ethics who then show discrimination?
I think that's a really difficult question to answer. And I would be really nervous about sort of being generalist, because I recognize that outside faith, there are people who have campaigned for justice. And I also recognize that there are people within faiths who still in our own day keep prejudice going. I think I've recently had quite a robust discussion with the president of Humanists UK on this issue, and I think one concern that I do have is the perception of a negative form of indoctrination which exists from outside the faith community. And in particular, it was in relation to church schools, which is a controversial subject, faith schools in the 21st century. However, I think I would be defensive in the Christian tradition that those in positions of seniority are increasingly committed to this task. I don't think that does answer the question. I don't feel confident to either decry those of no faith or to be too proud about achievements that I don't feel we've made at this stage. So I think, yeah, that's probably as much as I would say.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Mandisa, you're next, and then Ahmed.
Thank you. That just brought to mind something that I read recently, that throughout history, because Baha'is believe in progressive revelation, and that every founder of the religions has come at a different time, and there is essentially only one major religion of God. And each time a manifestation of God has, declared their mission, they declared it at a time and point when society was at its lowest. So when Moses delivered the slaves from the pharaohs, that was the lowest point. When Jesus appeared, society had just really gone down in blasphemy and also, idol worshipping and all sorts of things. So every time a manifestation of God appears, he does so just to reignite the spark and the flame of religion as it has died down over 1,000, 2,000 years. And the other thing is, and each time that manifestation comes, it's like rain that just falls on everyone. So whether those people follow that religion or not, the influence of that manifestation of God is going to be far-reaching. In other words, when Baha'u'llah appeared, he was talking about the equality of men and women, but people who perhaps have not heard of the Baha'i faith were also talking about the emancipation of women and the suffragette movement and all that. It's like the influence of these manifestations of God touch humanity anyway. It's so people of faith, no faith, if you are of pure heart and your mission in life is to serve humanity, you are going to be touched indirectly by the teachings of a religion. And we need to be very mindful as people of faith that in every space we walk into, that we're not echoing the negativity of the outside world, that we are bringing a light to every discussion and every space that we occupy.
Okay, thank you, Mandisa. Move on to Ahmed, please.
Hi. Yeah, I'm not really sure if I can answer the question, but I see, some of these problems as a human issue, and I wouldn't really want to. I'm reluctant to say whether, because just to echo what the deacon said, there are people who are faithless and who care so much about humanity. They care for equality, and on the other hand, you see people that have a faith who unfortunately are doing the opposite. I feel people that have the faiths, it's down to them to really sincerely look into their beliefs, because you'll find and all these beliefs that equality is very important for humanity. So it's a case for the ones with faith to really, be sincere about it, and to implement the beliefs. It's not just lip service, it's actually doing the work itself,
Okay.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you, Ahmed. Much appreciated. I'm going to go on to, excuse me, going to go on to Rabbi Danny Rich. Danny.
Yeah, I mean, I think the simple answer is there are good people of religion and equally excellent people of no religion, and there are bad people of religion and equally bad people of no religion. So that's not what the question for me is about. The question for me is about, are there people who are able to both celebrate difference but acknowledge the oneness of humanity? And that's the first point. And then the second point is not that they just say it, but they actually live it. So I'm less concerned about what people believe and more about what they do. And so if people say, I believe in racial equality, but practice inequality, then they're not the type of people I want to be associated with. If people say, oh, I don't really know what I think about racial inequality, but I know damn sure that I'm going to practice equality as best I can in my life, including how I treat my neighbors and who I rent property and all the other things that Donovan and others have referred to, then they're the people I want to associate with. So I'm, despite the fact that I personally am a very strong believer, I will work with people who believe all sorts of bizarre things that I don't agree with or believe in, including some of the teachings of the church, for example. But that's not the issue for me. I work and spend a lot of time working with people of Muslim faith, of Hindu faith, of Baha'i faith, of Christian faith, and of no faith, if they're committed to creating a society which acknowledges the value of difference, but also the unity of humankind.
Okay. Thank you very much, Danny. I know, Donovan, that you're not here as a faith speaker specifically, but I think I'm going to open it to you as well to answer how you. Is there anything you'd like to add to that? But don't forget to unmute yourself.
It's a good job you reminded me to do that. I think the Rabbi just spoke absolutely perfectly on the matter. I was raised a Christian, but just kind of had some issues with Christianity as I got older, became more mature, and these days, I suppose I would call myself spiritual without aligning myself to any particular religion.
Okay.
What I do understand, though, is that, as the Rabbi said, it's not so much what you do, or not so much what you say, because there are a lot of people talking very loudly about, what they're going to do. It's much more to do with, what are your actions? How do you translate what you said into positive, beneficial actions? And that's about the only criteria by which I judge a person these days, plus the old-fashioned perspective that, we live, what you do here will be repaid to you there, be it good or bad. That's the kind of moral compass that I kind of live by these days. You just try to do the best you can and not to do unkind, cruel, unnecessary things to other people. You're looking to be positive towards people around you, and it does actually work, because I find myself, as I get older, reaching out to people, people who I wouldn't normally reach out to, but I almost feel it's my job to kind of, hi, I am this, and this is what I'm about. What are you doing? How are you doing? Because I suppose as you enter the last bit of your lifespan, you realise that there are all sorts of things that can be sorted out if people were just to kind of have a conversation with one another and try to explain and try to kind of get people to see things from a perspective that perhaps they haven't looked at before.
Thank you very much, Donovan. That's
Certainly.
great. So, going on to the next question, which says, as a convert to the Muslim faith, I wonder, is there any way we can encourage those born into the faith to understand Islam as a faith for all humanity? Same with Christian converts or Baha'i converts, etc., keen to be an ally as a white convert. So I'm not quite sure whether the writer meant if that's the same with, for example, Christians who have converts to their own faith, Baha'is having converts to their own faith, or if the writer means converts to Islam from other faiths. I wasn't quite sure about that. But at least the first part, as a convert to the Muslim faith, I wonder, is there any way we can encourage those born into the faith to understand Islam is a faith for all humanity? Okay, so I'm going to you, Ahmed, to start the ball rolling. You have to unmute that here. Unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, it's going to be a continuous exercise, because you see, unfortunately, you see people need to be reminded quite often that actually your tradition actually encourages encourages equality, you know. And I think what it is, I think it's a lack of reading into the scriptures or actually contemplating what's being said. Because a lot of times when we go to the sermon, we do hear these stories. We hear these stories of equality. We hear these stories of, you know, nations being enslaved. For example, the story of Moses and his people being enslaved by Pharaoh, and the trials and tribulations that they suffered. You know, they were persecuted. You know, and that could be a great example of what we have witnessed today. You know, so it is very important for our religious speakers and those who have a platform to really have this conversation about equality, because something unfortunately is going wrong. Something is going terribly wrong. Why these attitudes are creeping in to religion, and it seems that they are being swept underneath the carpet. And what happens, unfortunately, when converts, you know, convert to these religions, they're swept in with the tide, unfortunately. So, you know, if we don't want to lose our worshippers, our converts, then we need to really encourage our spiritual leaders, and you know, that should trickle down into the wider community. You know, yeah, that's what I have to say about that, actually.
Okay, thank you. So I'm not quite sure whether or not the Gemma Ahmed actually meant same question to same with Christian converts. Oh,
Simon,
thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Has sent a further comment saying, sorry,
Okay.
I meant converts to any faith, not just Islam.
Okay, in that case, I can open it up to other faiths as well. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to, well, let's start with Mandisa, then we'll go to Danny, then we'll go to Chris.
Thank you, Simon.
Paul, sorry, not Chris, sorry, Paul. Said your name wrong then. Brain wasn't working, apologies. Sorry, Mandisa, Danny, and then Paul. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, Simon. What comes to mind is a beautiful quotation that I'm going to take from Baha'u'llah's writings, and that is Baha'u'llah likened people of African descent to being like the pupil of the eye. People of African descent are regarded in this way because, I'll quote here, in this black pupil is seen the reflection of that which is before it, and through it the light of the spirit shineth forth. And for me, as I was growing up and deciding what path to follow, being regarded as the pupil of the eye, as a person of African descent in the Baha'i faith, just made my faith even stronger, because I knew that we're charged with a very special role and responsibility that comes with that. And it just helps me find my footing in my faith, and it's a guiding principle for all Baha'is on how we treat each other and how we regard each other with that oneness. Saying that, I was also told that the biggest test in the Baha'i faith would be other Baha'is after I declared as a Baha'i, and just reminding yourself of the oneness of humanity. And if there are any differences that arise before us, we just imagine that, you know, we are in the presence of Baha'u'llah, or, you know, and we're able to overlook each other's shortcomings, but not ignore them, definitely not sweep them under the rug. Is to gently, patiently, and lovingly guide somebody aright if you're aware of something that another person is not aware of.
Okay, thank you. I just to say, I've received a message from my host, Phil, saying if we can encourage maybe 1 minute answers now, so that we can get more questions through. So apologies to people if I'm going to make it a little bit shorter. So Danny, you're first on the spot, so I apologize for that.
Okay, I'll try. First of all, having said that I like people who acknowledge the oneness of humanity, I also want to be clear, I don't believe in a universal faith, in one faith. I believe in the differences of faiths. So I'm delighted that there are Christians and Muslims and Jews and Baha'is and Hindus in the world, because they might be right and I might be wrong. And so that's an important point I want to make. Judaism does accept people who convert to Judaism from other faiths or from no faiths. The problem is they're a bit like reformed smokers. They tend to be very militant. They're always disappointed by what they find. Jews who are born into Judaism are very happy and a bit more relaxed about it. Jews who make a strong effort to convert to Judaism are often disappointed by it. They think Jews are not religious enough, and they're not active enough, and they're not vocal enough. And one of the it seems to me that what we all have to do with our converts is to just get them to be a little bit cooler and a little bit more relaxed about the thing they've joined.
Okay, thank you very much. That's lovely. And on to Paul. You've got your name right now, Paul. I'm not going to make a mistake again.
In a minute. This is almost impossible. Can I have the 2 minutes back I didn't use earlier? I mean, I concur with so much of what has been said. Pure wisdom. The word that came to mind was one of my heroes, actually, Desmond Tutu, who has a remarkable history. And I remember talking to him back in 1994 about the way in which he had to reconstruct the way he thinks. But preaching in Tromsø, north of the Arctic Circle, back in the late 90s, to a gathering of young, different people of all sorts of different faiths, he said, lift your hands, move your hands, wave your hands, different colours representing different people. We are the rainbow people of God. We want peace, prosperity and justice, and we can have it when the people of God, the rainbow people of God, work together. And I sense that speaks into this question.
And you did it in 59 seconds. Well done. Okay, let's go. I have to say, there's no way we'll be able to go through all the questions. We have lots of questions here. I'm just trying to find some that may be useful for us. Here we go. Okay. Okay. To all panelists, do you consider religious education in schools to be inadequate? And should they be much broader and teach the basic principles of all and explore the common verities more? That's a hard one to throw at people. So I think I'll start, if I may, with Ahmed. I'll repeat the question, Ahmed. Do you consider religious education in schools to be inadequate? And should it be much broader and teach the basic principles of all and explore the common verities more?
I don't think it's inadequate. I don't necessarily think it needs to be very broad. I feel like, you know, if people can just get a gist of what people believe, I think that would be very good. It promotes harmony, and it would make individuals understand each other a bit more. I wouldn't necessarily say it needs to be an in-depth education, you know, sort of course. If that answers the question.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to pass it on to Paul, followed by Danny.
Really sorry,
Okay.
struggled to find the unmute button. Again, I would find it really difficult to make a generalized statement about schools. I am enormously proud of Church of England schools, which do come under fire on a regular basis. But I think the ethos of being really authentic in the values of the Christian faith, but also celebrating all faiths. And I have been into a Church of England school that has a population which is 97% Muslim, is really key. And I would certainly speak strongly for our own schools and for the sort of values, the tolerance that is very much an ethos in those.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And on to Danny.
So let me say that I acknowledge that many faith schools and Church of England schools do a very good job. But in principle, I don't believe in faith schools. I believe that faith is for a matter for homes, and schools are for a matter of teaching people what I call moral values of citizenship, which is not about the specifics of Christian, Judaism, Hindu, Muslim, or anything else. Having said that, in England, of course, the church took a major role in educating people, and I acknowledge that completely. And once you've got Church of England schools, then the Catholics ask for schools, and then the Jews ask for schools, and now the Muslims ask for schools, and the Hindus are asking for schools. And my fear is that one day we'll end up with ghettoized schools. So, for example, the Jewish community, I have to tell you, I'm in a strong minority, but something like over 50% of Jewish children now go to Jewish schools. I am not yet convinced, even though there's some great Jewish schools, and there are great Christian schools and great Muslim schools, I'm not convinced in the long term that is good for society. Having said that, I've also seen, both in secular and religious schools, some excellent religious education and also some very poor religious education. And I would, if we were starting again, I'd have secular schools which taught morality and taught things like choice and tolerance and pilgrimage and faith in the broadest sense, rather than a narrow denominational sense.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Danny. Mandisa.
Thank you. I think basically we need to ask ourselves where we want to go as humanity, because in the Baha'i faith, humanity is likened to being a person who is growing, and we are going through our adolescent stage. And in order for us to get to our mature stage, what do we need? We need spiritual growth, we need physical education, we need material education, and all of those things will then guide humanity to advance to the next stage in its civilization. So I think we just need to ask ourselves, where do we want to go as humanity? And then we can make the decision from there.
Okay, thank you, Mandisa. I'm going to take, as I'm aware it's just after past, we're going to take one last question with your permission, panelists, which is, if I just find the question, I just lost it there, excuse me. Yeah. It says, thank you to all the panelists for their moving stories. Would you agree there is a lot of ignorance out there and a lack of knowledge of the different faiths? The politicians are not helping us by what they say sometimes, and also equally the way the media portray situations. So I'll repeat that, there's quite a lot in there. Would you agree there's a lot of ignorance out there and a lack of knowledge of the different faiths? The politicians don't help us by what they say sometimes, and equally the way the media portray situations. Okay, so I think I'll start with Mandisa actually this time. Mandisa, could you start us off, please?
Thank you. I can only look at my own Facebook page and see that my own views are often reflected back to myself with algorithms and all sorts of things. And unless I go out of my way to listen to other people's points of views, I'm not going to get it. And it goes back to the principle of independent investigation of truth. If we're going to be passive media consumers, then that's exactly what's going to happen. We're going to believe any propaganda that's thrown at us, and we're not going to investigate further.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to Ahmed.
Yes, I do feel there's a lot of ignorance. Up to this day, I'm really quite surprised that a lot of people don't seem to know that Islam is like Abrahamic faith. When I speak to Christians, they're really surprised about, you know, how much in common that we have, you know, and that's I guess due to the media and a lack of education in terms of how close the faiths are. So I feel that we do need a lot more of outreach to do in that regards.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. Paul.
Yes, I am constantly amazed. I think my favourite story was my wife in a school playground a few years ago when somebody asked her, I know your husband is a vicar, but are you allowed to celebrate Christmas in your religion? And yeah, I mean, I do realise that, you know, we're moving into a place where, you know, there is a huge amount of ignorance, and we've felt a little as a faith community. I don't know whether anybody else can relate to this, but we felt a little as if the sort of government are trying to push us into into their leisure industry. So I think it's happening at all sorts of levels. It concerns me hugely, and there's a massive job of education for us all to do.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. Danny.
So I want to say three things really. The first, I want to say, yes, there's a lot of ignorance, but when I think about racial inequality, the people who lead racial inequality movements are often highly educated, and they're often people of faith. So let's not assume that we can blame racial inequality on people who are ignorant. Who tolerate racial inequality and often perpetrate it are highly intelligent, and some of them sadly are even motivated by what they think is a religious faith. But putting that aside, it's also very easy to blame the media and the politicians. Essentially, we get the media and the politicians we deserve. You know, I mean, if we stopped reading and stopped subscribing to rubbish, and if we made sure that the people we selected to be politicians, we selected on for their abilities and not on the basis of their purient lifestyles and all sorts of other things, we do much better. So I don't blame the politicians and the media. At the end of the day, we're all responsible for what happens in our society, particularly vis-a-vis racial inequality.
Okay, thank you very much. Donovan, I'm going to ask you to finish off. You started everything. You may have noticed I've just gone back chronologically through the religions, and then.
Can I just say, I think Donovan would be a great convert to Judaism, by the way.
Thank you very much indeed, whoever. Again, you know, the speakers have all spoken quite sagely and wisely about it. We get the politicians and the media that we want, or that we're prepared to accept. I think there is a thing about education, and I don't think we teach critical thinking or just not accepting things as they're spoon-fed to you by the politicians or by the media. You know, you have an obligation as a human being to find out for yourself, critical thinking, independent research, and then you can start making your minds up. But I don't know whether it's a laziness or that our kids have not been, and when I say kids, I'm talking about everybody, whether we haven't been educated sufficiently to kind of develop that critical thinking bit. Me, I've never ever kind of just accepted what's been told to me. I like to go away and go and have a little look myself, and then I'll come back and then I've got an opinion about it. But I think that critical thinking is the thing that will take us from where we are now in this whole social media platform generation to a place where we can use it more wisely than we do currently. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. We've really come to the end. I just say that we don't have time for more questions. We're already overrun. I have a few things that I have to do before I finish. First of all, I would very, very, very much like to thank all of our speakers today, Rabbi Danny Rich, the Venerable Paul Davies. I've had trouble with you all day on your Welsh. I don't know how I managed that.
More like the vulnerable.
That's Gray, and Mandisa Nakana Taylor, and Donovan Blair. Thank you so much for all your contributions today and being put on the spot with these questions. I wouldn't like to be in your position myself, but thank you for answering so honestly and so wisely. It's been very helpful. Speaking from a working people of faith perspective, it's good to see just how much we do have in common across the faiths. And it's lovely to hear you expressing those in all your different ways. I have also been asked to say from one of our trustees, Mita, that there's also an interfaith cricket tournament later in the year, again, COVID-19 allowing, as well as football one. That's usually going to be in September, though we did have one a few months ago. That was good. That was great. And our host, Phil, said we'd love to have texts from today's talks as thoughts for the week. If the panelists are happy for them to be published, just send us your texts. I realize, Ahmed, you came in at the very last moment and you had to add a little bit as well, so it must be most difficult for you. Maybe you could put some of your main thoughts down. That'd be really helpful. And send them, please, to Korta, as she's been your direct contact, and then she can forward them to Kerry, our administrator, if that's okay. But as she's your immediate point of contact, she's perhaps the best person for you to send it to. So that's for Thoughts of the Week. And that will then go on to the Working People of Faith website under the Thoughts of the Week section. I'd also like to thank Kerry Barry, our administrator, and Kortha Akhtar, who does millions of different things. I'm sure quite a few of you know her very well. And they have been such a huge support in this, together with myself and with Phil, have put this all together today. So thank you, and thank you to Phil for hosting as well, taking that weight off my mind. And thank you to all the attendees as well, because without you and your questions and coming along today, there perhaps wouldn't have been so much point in having this. So I'm really pleased that according to this, we had 39 participants today. Thank you all so much for coming along, watching, listening, and participating with your questions. Oh, thank you. Phil is very kindly thanking me for chairing and being the MC. Thank you, Phil. Thank you all very much for being here today. And if you're a person of faith or no faith, then bless you. And if you're a person of faith, God bless you. And take care, keep well, keep safe in this COVID-filled world. And hopefully the next time we meet, it'll be in a much safer world. So thank you very much and bless you all. Take care.